Plug and Alley presents Working in Music Sucks, the show where we talk about what sucks about working in music so you don't have the same problems. I'm your host, John Maciel, and today's episode we're going to talk about something that I always see online so often, and there's so many go-to guides on how to figure this out that I personally think are kind of not what people necessarily need to think about and are garbage. And I mean, I shouldn't say that. They're a great place to start, but there's so many other factors in figuring out today's episode's topic, and that's figuring out your rate as a producer, as a recording engineer. And it's something that so many creatives in general, not just music, but videography, photography, painters, everyone kind of has a different opinion on this matter. And I used to think a certain way about it, and then I started living the life and realizing that ultimately, no one can tell you what your rates should and shouldn't be because the market will tell you yes or no. And a great example is years ago when I was working in Burbank, and I was in Los Angeles and I had a studio in Burbank. And me and my studio partner at the time were talking about rates and how a lot of people, that's way too much or that's not enough. But a lot of producers and engineers, and we know, people would pay their rates and they'd be like, I can't believe people are paying them like $2,000 a single. And it's like, if people are paying it, maybe you should be asking yourself, should I be charging that? The market will dictate, and your sales skills will dictate, can you actually pull in that rate? But on this episode, I want to talk about more about things to think about when you're thinking about your rate. Now, I know in the episode of studio roles that I'll link to in the show notes, I discussed kind of all the roles and kind of how to think about it. And if you're a one-man shop or you're a one-person shop and you're doing every role, right? You're handling everything. You're the producer, you're the engineer, you're the mixer, you're the master engineer. You're doing it all. You're essentially already giving a discount to your artist or client. Whatever word. I know some people get mad when they hear the word client. Artist or client, whatever you want to say. Either way, you're in the service industry and the other person on the other end, they're your customer, client, or artist, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I've never met an artist or someone who got mad for any of the terminology that I use, but I know some people out there get upset about it. And it's all the same thing. We're all saying the same thing at the end of the day, but you need to, ultimately it comes down to how do you talk with the artist, and are they offended if you call them a client? If they are, then I don't know. I think that's kind of a weird thing to be offended by. I mean, do you call? Yeah, I don't know the right answer. But anyways, if I use the word client, artist, or customer, I am essentially referring to the same thing, and it's whatever terminology works for you. And again, if your artists are do never call us a client, then always say artist. Simple as that. But anyways, when you're figuring out your rate, the first thing you need to figure out is if you're online and you're trying to compete with people online, you need to know what the online marketplace is offering. And a lot of people mess this up because they don't know what pros are charging. I know what pros are charging. I'm not going to say it on the podcast because that's their business. I'm not going to air it out. But I can say that you have to be smart in your rates because when you put them online, you're competing with the World Wide Web, to age myself a little bit there. But you're competing with everybody. But if you backtrack that and you're like, I'm only going to worry about local and regional business. All right, cool. Now you're in a situation where you can actually get away with a premium now. As funny as that sounds, the moment you compete online with everyone, it's kind of like you're in such a competitive space that you devalue yourself, because now you're in a situation where someone can go to a forum and get 50 people to say, oh, I'll mix your record for cheap. And that artist is going to be like, oh, why not go with this person? They're going to give me a mix, because to them, they just think of a mix as a commodity. They're not thinking as oh, it's an actual process, and you need the right mixer to make the right song come to life. Kind of like a film needs the right director with the right vision. Otherwise, the film can be totally weird and not what was intended. So it's kind of like Harry Potter's sorting hat thing. It's like the mix chooses the mixer, not the other way around. And some mixers are so good they're a chameleon and they can mold into anything. But the moment you step back and you're like, actually, I'm going to only focus on local and regional, you now are able to, if you're good enough, to charge a premium. Now, there's other factors to consider. You have to know, who's the competition in town. Do you know every major studio, every engineer? Chances are you probably don't, because I don't know many students in the past that knew this information off the top of their head, right? They're like, well, I just know there's like this studio or that studio, but they don't know the full market. And if you're a producer, mixer, home studio individual, and you're trying to make it, it's a business that you're running now. So now you need to understand the market. What are people's options? If you're Burger King and you're coming into town and you're like, okay, what do we got? We got a Chick-fil-A, we got a Popeyes, we got a McDonald's, we got a mom and pop burger shop. You need to understand who are your other competitors in town if you're going to have a chance, right? And once you know the competition in town, then you need to start looking and see if you can find out, what do they charge? What are their rates? And if it's not listed, you need to, figure out an ethical way of finding out their rates. And it's important to know, like, who is charging, and then what kind of clients are these studios bringing in? You need to understand all this information and write this all down and kind of get a ballpark of, okay, they do rock, they do, who's exactly in your world? Are you trying to do rock and metal, pop and country? You need to know who's recording what. Then from there, you need to figure out, what do the mixes sound like in the recordings? You need to know all of this, and you need to do your homework, and you need to ask yourself objectively and honestly, taking another step back, am I comparable to these? Am I better than these? Am I not as good? And you need to really, really, really have a grasp on where you are at. Now, if you're like, oh, I know I'm better, like I can just hear it, that's awesome. But that also means that you have two big things to work on: networking and social skills. And they're not easy to develop, but they are skills nonetheless, and they can be developed. Just like learning how to EQ and compress, you can learn to network and have social skills. Very few professionals are born with a natural ability to do it. It's a skill set that many, many creatives and entrepreneurs and business owners have to learn to do because they're doing business. And again, this facade that thinking about the studio or your home studio as a hobby that you're turning full time, you have a business. Like, let's call it what it is. You have a business, and you need to treat it like a business and think of it as a business. It's a hell of a fun business, and it's the best business to be in because it's your passion, but it's still a business, and you need to operate like a business if you're going to succeed. And if you're going to be able to charge people a livable income that's going to pay for expenses and your lifestyle. And if you only think of it as this hobby that I'm going to, do some, friend and family discounts here and there, it's not sustainable. So everything that we're doing is creating a formula so that it can be sustainable for you. Now, once you have the information, you've gone and done the homework, and you're like, okay, I know I'm better than these people. Okay, but being better is not and will never be enough. There's a lot of really talented guitar players and drummers out there who are better than a lot of people in a lot of big bands, but they lack the network, the social skills, the business mindset, and also the drive to endure how many no's you're going to get in this business and how many more mistakes you're going to get and make. So now that you have this grasp of where you're at, here's a little leg up in figuring out your rate. So a lot of people like to, you need to know how much you need to, pay your rent or your mortgage, utilities, groceries, fun activities, going to the movies. You need to have that number on like a budget, but give yourself a little leeway, if a movie comes out or something, or I don't know, like a new iPhone and you want to get the iPhone, like you need to build like a reasonably real world budget. And if you don't know what it is, take your last 6 month bank statements on what you've spent money on and kind of like average out your spending expenditure, and like take the 6 months, divide it by, 6, and then that's your average, and just go with that number, right? So you're going to say, this is my monthly living expense. Cool. And then what we need to do from there is we need to figure out what your time is worth. So the way we do this is there's a timing app from the company Hosa that while you're mixing and editing, start timing yourself. Like every time you do anything on the computer, mixing, editing, recording. You need to start tracking how long it takes you to do stuff. And you can do this for like a month and a half, but you need to have a realistic idea of how much time it actually takes you to do things. There is a productivity program that I love and I use all the time. I cannot recommend it enough, and I'll put it in the show notes, and it's called ClickUp. And one thing that I love about ClickUp, because it's a project management tool, there's others like Monday and Asana. They're all fine. But what I love about ClickUp is that there's a timer on it. So when I create like any sort of editing task or mixing task or podcast or anything, I can hit the button to track my time and then unclick it when I'm done. And it will keep a record of how long it's taking me to do everything. So I don't have to write it down. I can just go in there and click the time, and then I can go review my stats and be like, okay, this is how much time I spent doing this month's worth of projects and things of that nature. But timing yourself and being honest, like, oh, it takes me like 6 hours to do vocals that, like, this style of vocal takes me 6 hours to do for a whole track. These type of guitars take me like half a day. Really knowing these numbers is crucial, because you need to understand how many hours, if a band hires you to do a record, how many hours or days is it going to take to do that record, which is going to be important. And again, you need to decide your hours. Like, are you going to work a 10-hour day, an 8-hour day? How are you going to set your time for that? Like, you need to understand that, and only you can answer that. Everyone's different. Me, I have been fortunate enough to be like a 9 to 6 type of audio engineer for the last few years. After 6 o'clock, I'm not doing anything audio related. I'm learning work-life balance, and some producers and mixers aren't given the opportunity. And if you're working with a lot of like bands, you have to find like a compromise between them. But understanding how long it takes you to do tasks. Next is, as you're doing these and you're like, man, this is time, you have to refine your process and ask yourself, okay, I'm spending a lot of time doing this, and then this. How can I refine it? Do I need to get something like Keyboard Maestro to make macros? Do I need to create an editing template, a writing template, a mixing template, a mastering template, and different versions of these templates for different types of songs? Maybe for heavy metal, I do this. Maybe for rock, I do this. For pop, I do this. Having templates dialed in for particular sessions and tasks will help so much, like podcasting. Do you have a podcast template, an audiobook template? These are so many things to think about to streamline your process. And the reason we want to do all this is because this is all going to give you an idea of your rate ultimately. And if you don't know how long it actually takes you to do things, you're just guessing, you're guesstimating, and you're not going to be able to scale off of guesses. You can only scale your business off of what you actually know. And unless you do these things, you're just going to end up like exerting yourselves too much and burning yourself out. Now, the next one is, and this one is a little nerdier, but it's like, do you have an onboarding system? Meaning, when you meet an artist and they're like, you know what, we do want to work with you. So like, what's the next step? Do you have like a sign up page on like, all right, so here's this link. All you need to do is I collect 50% deposit up front, the other 50% after we're done with the project. This will link you to my calendar. Once you select the dates that your band wants to do, put them in here. You can pay by credit card. It'll collect payment, and those dates are scheduled for you. And from there, you'll get an email that kind of takes you through what the process of recording is. And it's like a series of videos, like what to have, strings, etc. And you have like a whole process, so you don't have to have this conversation every time. And in that email, it also tells them you're going to get another email for any mix notes or anything. So any notes that you have will take place in this email. And the reason you want to have it through email also is emails for most states, and from what I understand, grain of salt, talk to an attorney about it. But emails are, actionable items that can be like held truthful in a court of law. So that's why having an email system is really helpful, because a lot of people like to get into contracts and have people sign shit. I think if you're worried about contracts at an early stage in the game, you're worried about the wrong things. You need to be worried about the relationship you have with the artist. Do they trust you? Just use an email system and have one person be the voice of the band, and they're liable because of those emails. It'll hold up. You don't need a contract. You'll need a contract when you get to the point to where a label and other things get involved. And at that point, someone who's going to hit you up about being a manager for you, and they'll take care of that stuff. But for the most part, I know a online gurus love to say you need a contract, you should have a contract. I personally, very few times have seen anyone actually be like, oh, we get a contract before booking. It's like, no, they book the time, they come in, and we just talk through email because they can be held accountable in the court of law. So it's fine. Like, they don't need a contract. From there, the system of recalls, like, do you send a track and are they able to leave notes on the track, or do they leave it in a series of emails? What's your payment collection process? Can they pay with credit card? Are you worried about PayPal fees and other stupid stuff? If you're running a business, you shouldn't be worrying about fees. Account for the fees in your fee, in your rate. And then the calendar for the booking dates, and let them be responsible in finding the dates, and have a calendar system set up so they can look and see like, oh, these dates are available, these dates are available, cool. And they can book it and you don't have to worry about that. Doing these type of things will give you a leg up, because now not only are you comparable, if not better, now you also have a system that's so much better than what majority of these studios are offering. I know most of them don't have a system this dialed in. So now you're creating a system to where it's kind of automated for you at this point. So you can just focus on the relationship part, because the bookkeeping stuff is being taken care of. And that's going to give you the opportunity to work on your social skills, your networking skills, creating a great environment and experience for the band, which is ultimately going to be word of mouth for your marketing. The record's going to sound great. And everyone's going to be like, oh, dude is such a professional, or she's such a professional, or they're such a professional. They're great. They handled everything. Like, the process could have not been any easier. So these are things about thinking about when you're figuring out your rate. So once you have your number, you know how much you rate, how long it's going to take you, you're like, okay, cool. I know where I'm at. And that's how you find your rate. As simple as it sounds. Really taking the time to develop these systems, that's how you're going to find out how much you're worth, is based on your skill. And if you're not good enough yet, now you need to, you can create these onboarding systems to help give you a leg up, but you got some skills and you know where you need to, keep your focus on. So that said, if you found this episode helpful, please share it with a friend that you think might find some value in it as well. If you'd like to keep this conversation going, there is a Plugin Alley Discord server. Hop in there. We can talk more about this. Maybe you're having issues with certain, artists or clients, and you need some help navigating those waters, or you just want to talk about gear and mixes and things of that nature. Hop in the Discord server. We can have that conversation. And until next time, remember, working in music sucks, but it doesn't have to. Until next time.